All right, so we have had a couple cool talks on getting started with Vue and getting started contributing to the Vue San Diego website, which is cool. We had some talks on how a big company in San Diego is making the transition into Vue and that experience, and that was really cool. So now we are going to actually take a look at some code, some very simple practical examples. I'm going to look at handling errors in Vue and what Vue gives us just out of the box to do that. So we're looking at the Vue San Diego website. This is a project that I'm working on just locally, so you're not going to see this on the live website. And this red box is just what I'm calling out. Like, there's going to be a lot going on, but this is the focus area that we're going to be looking at tonight. So what we've got is on the homepage.
Change your color scheme.
What? Oh. Yeah. Hit those lights for me. Thank you. Let's see. If we do, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to. There we go. Here we go. That's looking better. Cool. So there's a lot going on in this file that you don't really have to pay attention to. All I'm calling out here is that this big red box is corresponding to this little component that I have on the home page, right? And this little component, example, is in a file called example.vue. So this is a very contrived little example of what might happen in your project. You can see this little squiggly that VS Code is telling me that there's something wrong with this. It's saying that it's not defined. So of course I might not make this error today, but it could happen that at some point you make an error in your project where you call an undefined variable or something else. So what happens if we do this is we can see that if I refresh that, we're going to get, I think I might have some error handling already in place. No? Okay. We refresh, and we can see something like, test is not defined. And I feel like that should, I know what happened. Let me go.
Does everybody know what the mounted
I got some
function does? Can you just spend 30 seconds on it?
Yeah, of course. Sorry. Jumping too far ahead. So let me refresh. Let me see. Okay, so this is going to happen is this is going to throw an error in my console, right? It's going to say reference error test is not defined. So really quick, the way Vue works is it's going to give you some templates that you can spit out. So instead of JSX, if you've looked at that, or if you're just looking at HTML, this should look pretty familiar. We've just got the HTML that we're rendering, which is cool. And then Vue provides us with some lifecycle hooks. So when this component goes through certain parts of its lifecycle, meaning it is created, it is mounted onto the DOM, eventually maybe it's like taken off and destroyed, we can tie functionality into those lifecycle events. So with Vue, one of the most common lifecycle hooks that you'll see is the mounted hook. And all this is saying is when this component mounts onto the DOM, run this function, right? So this is a function. We can also call it like this or define it like this. We can say on the mounted hook, run this function. It's going to say 1 plus test. Obviously, that doesn't work. So when we look at that in our console, when this component mounts right here, right? This is the H1 this is our component, H1 example, right? When that mounts onto the DOM, it's going to try and run that function. And then we're going to get a reference error. Test is not defined. Everyone with me so far?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to look at a little bit of an example on how we can handle that. So the first way we can look at that is in the component, we have what's available to us is try catch, right? So any functionality that we're not sure whether it's going to work or not, we can wrap in a try block, and if it experiences an error, we can handle that error in a catch block. So I'm going to catch my error, and then I'm going to console log it. If I want, I can even get some more details about that error. So by adding this and hitting save, we now have the try catch wrapping our functionality. We can take a look, we can reload that. And now we see we have oops, which is the text that I'm logging here. And then I'm also logging out what the error is. So we still see what the error is in a log, not as an error. But what you might do with this is, like, if I experience an error, I might want to say, instead of example, I might want to say, oh, there was an error with this component. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So if I take out that log, or if I take out that error and we refresh that, we should just see, oops, yep. So we had an error. This mounted, it tried to run some sort of function that we did not, that was not successful. Our error caught it, and our error handling logic handled the error. In a little bit more of a realistic example of what that might look like is on mounted. We might try and do something like a fetch, an HTTP request. So this is a pattern that you're going to see a lot more often, is when this component mounts, it should go to some API. In this case, this is just an API that does something good, or just returns a 200 response, which is a good response. And then in this case, I'm intercepting that promise, and I'm going to throw inside of that promise. All this is doing is saying, when this runs, actually throw an error. Okay, so we're inside of async. We have the await. We can console log what R is. In fact, that HTTP request goes out. We have the error, and then, something broke. Right? So once again, we have our error, and one way to handle that would be the pattern that we saw before, where we can wrap that in a try and catch error, and then console log something went wrong with your request. Save that, refresh, and we get, something went wrong with your request. Right? So maybe we have a loading state and we want to remove that loading state and we want to show an error state or whatever. Try catch is great. This all works really well, and so far we haven't touched on anything that Vue does differently than just regular JavaScript, right? All we're doing here is a try and a catch and regular fetch requests, blah, 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 whatever. So one thing that Vue does make available to us is the on error hook, I think. Yeah. So no, error captured. So what am I doing? So error captured is another one of those lifecycle hooks that I've mentioned, sort of like on mounted. I guess it's not a lifecycle hook so much as an event hook. And what the error captured hook does is, if an error occurs when this in this component, it'll provide us what the error was, information about the component in which that error occurred, and then just some Vue specific information. So if we go back to not handling this error, and we just have that fetch request that fails, we can see that our parent is going to catch that error and is going to say, hey, an error occurred. Here's some information that I logged about it, right? Here's the Vue component in which the error occurred, I believe. And then we have some info about that error. And then we also have the error itself. So this can be a really powerful pattern in which we no longer have to write our components, or we can be a little bit more flexible with how we write our components that may have errors. Because now, instead of handling all of the errors just on the component level, we can go up one level and say, well, let's handle this error on the page level, right? And let's say, because we might have many components that make up a page, many of which could fail. So if we have 5 components that make up a page and all of them could fail, we can either write logic around all 5 of those components to handle those errors, or we can handle it in one. And I'm going to add a little bit more logic here, just importing a component, saying, oops, on error captured, instead of logging that, I'm going to say this dot has error equals true. And where'd that go? Oops, right? Does anyone have questions so far? Sure? Okay. I'm going to keep going then. So in this case, Vue provides us with some directives that we can use for conditional rendering. So we can say if, actually, let me put that up. Yeah, put that first. So we'll say v-if equals we have an error. We're going to show this little error component that says oops. And if we don't have an error, we're going to show else. And if we go to our page and refresh, we experience an error in our component, right? Our child component experiences an error. Our parent component has the error captured flag or method or lifecycle hook, whatever. It has a hook flagged, so it's going to run that. When that runs, it's going to change the this.has error state to true. And because that's true, in our render, we're going to say this is true, so this is going to be rendered. And when it's not true, we have the example render. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. I have a question.
Hit me.
The error captured hook, you said it's in the parent.
Mm-hmm.
Why not put it in, like, will it catch any child error? Or why not put it in the child where you think, like, a code pathway may error? Like, why not put it in the catch?
Yeah, so
like
the error captured hook will be fired if any of the descendants experiences an error. Okay. So you don't have to be like in the immediate parent where an error may occur. And what makes this like a really nice sort of powerful feature is that all of a sudden, again, I can have like potential situations that could error in my child, and maybe just on the, in this case is the home page. So on the page level, I can handle what that error looks like, or what an error could look like.
So you might add, like if you had a logging service, you might want to kick out errors to a log that, because this might be happening on the client, you don't even know if this is occurring.
Exactly.
So you could do a mix-in for, like a standard mix-in for your pages and say, okay, well, this is our error handling pattern, and it always kicks out to a log or whatever, and you can override it on individual pages.
Yeah, exactly. So in some cases, you might want the fine-grained control of selecting one component and just handling the error within that component. In other cases, you might want to reach up to like just let that error throw and have like somewhere further up the chain be responsible for handling errors. So does anyone see a problem with this current setup where we have the page catching all of the errors and handling all of the errors for that page?
Can't get super granular with it, I guess.
Exactly. Right? So what happens if we have 3 different components that are completely isolated, that have 3 completely different errors, right? Is that we may want to show a different sort of error handling. And in this current example, we do get information about which component errored and the state, the information that Vue gives us, and even what the error was. So you could have a switch statement in here, or a couple like if statements, and then have different, this is the example error is true, and you might have another flag for another component and say like that error is true. But we're going to look at another approach that we can take that's similar to this, but a little bit different. This is kind of cool. Like I think it's really cool. You have the fine-grained approach of like right inside of an individual component, you can handle it. Or you can take like the very broad, like on a page level, any error that happens, we're going to like say something about it, right? And if you want something a little bit in between, you might find, so someone wrote an article about this and called it ErrorBoundary, but I'm just going to explain how this works, is you can have a component that is designed specifically for wrapping content which may error. Now remember that the on error or the error captured hook is going to happen on the parent component, not inside of the component where the error could happen, right? So what you can do is create a component that's going to output just a div, because we have to have some root level node, and then it's going to have some logic that says, does this wrapper have an error? It's going to be false to begin with. It's going to wrap around a child, which, if the error captured event is triggered, we're just going to set has error to true. And we're going to say, if we have an error, we're just going to show a generic message that says something went wrong. Otherwise, we're going to use this template just for the conditional logic. I guess I could have just put that like that, right? That works. So if we have an error, we're going to show a paragraph with the text something went wrong. Otherwise, we're going to show the default slot content. Is anyone not familiar with slots in Vue? Okay, so Vue, just real quick, gives us a way to write components where you can write up some wrapper functionality. So you can just pretend this wasn't here, right? So you can write some wrapper functionality. And in this case, maybe we want to wrap a component with a div. I don't know why you would want something so trivial. But this component will wrap around this slot whatever content we put around it. And then what the slot's responsibility is, that the way a slot works is when we write our custom component, let's say it was this one, we might want to put, some content in here. Okay, so if the example component had a slot, then whatever content we put inside of the example within the tags of the example component is going to be rendered where the slot is rendered. Does that explain it a little bit better?
Yeah. You have multiple slots or just one? You
can, and we might cover that in another talk or another night, but it's a bit beyond the scope of this talk. So where were we? We got this error boundary, right? And so if I go to the home page, if I go to the home page and I import that error boundary, and let's see, we remove this, and then we just say, this is going to be actually a better example of how error boundaries can be used, is now we no longer need our slot or our oops component. So what we can do is wrap our target component within an error boundary component, right? So what this is going to say is, where are we? Okay, if the child component experiences any errors, we're just going to replace it with a paragraph tag and show that there was an error. If there are no errors, we're going to show the child component, right? The component that is within the slot. So when we run this, we can see, we refresh, we've got a paragraph that says something went wrong. And that is because our thing went wrong. If we comment that out, we no longer have an error. We go back, we refresh, and we can see that our slot component is being rendered. So this is also a nice way to, you could definitely expand on this error boundary, and you could have it could have another slot where you could pass in, if there's an error or whatever, conditional logic to replace what this content would be. But that's kind of three different ways to handle from very fine control to very loose brush strokes of error handling, right? So the last thing I want to touch on is something that Daryl kind of brought up, which is you may reach a point where you're sending your code to production and you're not sure if maybe some bugs are being experienced on the front end. So you might want to reach out to a service such as Sentry.io or Bugsnag, or these services that will kind of wrap your application in a safety net. And if an error happens, they're not going to stop it from happening, but they are going to send that error to their service and give you a dashboard where you can see, Monday we experienced 3 different errors. these are what these are the environments the users were using, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to sell you too much on the services, but I am going to show you where you might implement that. Is the last place that Vue gives us to handle errors is in the config. So remember how I said that the errors will bubble all the way up to whatever the parent most component is that can catch that error. So Vue itself, like the root Vue component, is just that. It's just a parent component that has nested components inside. So on that like outermost Vue component, we can add the error handler method, which again is a function, takes error, takes the component, takes some info. The syntax looks a little bit different if you do it in the main.js, but essentially when there's an error, you can take that error and handle it and either send it off to your favorite bug tracking service or send it off to a backend for you to log, or just, send the user a console log of a Rickroll or something. I don't know. However you want to handle your errors, but this is just a nice little way to add error handling that's like the catch-all. So if we do that and we go back to our original component, because I think that is probably not going to handle that error, or that's not going to get fired because we actually don't have the error anymore. And that shouldn't get fired because somewhere further down the chain we're catching it, with something broke. If we go back to our homepage and we refactor that to just have our example, and fingers crossed, hopefully everything works, and all of a sudden one day it does not. We do get this error was caught by, did I not save that?
It's in there. Look at the yellow.
Oh yeah. Okay, there it is. It's because it was because it was a warning. I was just ignoring it. But yeah, basically this is a console warn, so it makes it yellow, right? But basically I'm saying, this was caught by the global error handler, and I'm saying, hey, this error was caught. This is the error that happened because this is the text that this is the error that we're throwing, right? Something broke. So that's why we see that. And then we see some information about the Vue component. So that's, in a nutshell, some nice features that I've found in Vue that I'm not sure how other frameworks or whatever, I'm not sure how some error handling is done in a lot of these. But I know that when I started getting into like handling my errors a lot more, Vue conveniently made it super easy as usual. So yeah, it's awesome. Question.
So you had this global error handler, but then I also saw your lower level error handler before you realized it was working, was also reporting. So like the global one will just fire no matter what.
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. Now, what if you have a lower level one like that wrapper you have using the slots, ErrorBoundary, and it's somewhere up the tree, and then
we do that.
On this path to the root, and it hits another. Does an error hit the first error captured and then stop propagating, or does it hit all the ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't explored it that far, but basically what you're asking for is this, right? We have this is going to be a parent of both the error boundary and the example.
Yeah.
Right? My first guess is that because we catch that error and handle it, we're not going to experience it twice. I think because we have it on the global like Vue config, it just kind of catches every error or every hook.
Yeah, that's error handler as opposed to error catcher, right?
Yeah. So that would be the difference, but let's take a look. That's a good question. We do have, what is going on here?
You're missing a comma when you uncommented that code.
Where at? Oh, here. Okay, gotcha. Cool. Those errors, though, Yeah, so it only gets registered once in the which in this case is the error boundary.
Which is what I would have wanted anyways.
Yeah, you don't want it like triggering everywhere, but it's sort of like, I guess you could picture it as if I write a try catch block, and inside of my catch I do something that could also throw an error. So then I write another like nested try catch there.
Yeah.
It's not going to trigger. Well, I guess the nested catch is, or error, catch is not going to trigger the parent one as well. Any other questions? No one writes errors in Vue?
The component variable in that error catcher, what's that output? Just
The component variable.
No, go. Oh yeah, that one. Yeah.
This one?
Yeah. Go back to that log.
Oh yeah, I guess it wouldn't be in this one. It would be.
No, it's already there. Go back to your Chrome.
Like, what is this?
Control plus. Yeah, it's that. It's cool.
Yeah, so it's just like how does it? No. Linux boy. So basically, like, this is just going to be a Vue component object or a class. Yeah, this would be the same as if, let's see, where am I going to be? Example, like mounted, right? If I just do like console log this, I should get about the same thing. Yeah. So there it is. That's the component that had or experienced the error, right? UID8. It's just a Vue component. You got the slots and all the properties and methods and stuff available you would see on that.
Rolling out some stuff like that. It does a really good job in command line, just like telling you exactly where like an error is and which notifications in. But it doesn't really get into the gritty stuff that you want to kind of help you along. So
Yeah.
So that's what just carry over.
So one more thing that I kind of want to touch on that is not directly related to errors, but will kind of help as you debug things, or even in the Vue.js dev tools, if you're using that extension for Chrome, is it's not, I mean, obviously none of the properties are required, but it's, you might come across the property of name. Let me call it. And you may think like it doesn't actually do anything. For a long time, I wondered like if that was necessary or why it was an option, right? But what happens is having a name on your components, I still rarely add it, but it adds some nice features in terms of, I think it will tell you what component. No, I guess in this case it doesn't.
I think if you have like a more traditional error stack.
Yeah, let's try.
In the Vue dev tools.
Let's try breaking it. Yeah. Hit that. Do we still have the wrapper? We do. You can tell me. Give me something good. Oh. Let's go all the way. Undo everything.
There you go.
Yeah, so here, if we don't have that, I think, what does this say if we don't have the name? Doesn't help a lot, but I know that in the Vue dev tools, it does make a difference. And I think in some cases when you do have an error, just having the name on there can help you figure out which component experienced the error. So yeah, we got, let's see, the router. There's my example.
I think it's just like a way to make it more human readable in case like your import name isn't great.
Yeah, maybe. I know if we didn't have the name my example, this would actually say just example, which is the component. But
and can you show how you can see the error?
error?
The error in Vue DevTools?
Yeah.
I don't think that you would see the error in Vue DevTools. Yeah, you would see it in like the console. I don't know. I haven't explored with like checking out errors in Vue DevTools, but just handling them.
What are the advantages of Vue DevTools?
What are the advantages of Vue DevTools?
Oh my goodness.
Okay, yeah.
More topics next month are writing themselves.
That's a real good question. So the advantages of Vue DevTools is like if I have the elements explorer, right, in just Chrome, I can see that I've got a div and I've got a header and I've got another div and I've got an H1 and another, or the closing div and a section and all that, right? But if I go to the Vue DevTools, I can see that I have my root component, I have my app component, I've got my VSD header component, which is a component that I've registered. I've got this home component, which is a router view, which is the view that is currently being rendered by the Vue router. And then I've got my example component.
They're the same components.
You are seeing components. You might be able to turn components off as well. No, that's just which one I want to look at. But then with this component highlighted, I can see properties of that component. So this component doesn't really have data on it, but I can show you if we say like data, oops. Is awesome true. Right, and now we have some data associated to that component. So check out Vue DevTools. When we look at my example, now I can see information about what's going on in that component. I can also edit it and like say false. And if I had conditional rendering going on, I can see like that helps me see it, right?
So you could test like that has error. See if your UI is working right just by just changing it there. It's like, yes, maybe you can't, maybe it's not easy to generate the error because you're like, because you don't have you're going to third-party API, it always works. Okay, but what happens if I do get an error? Maybe you just change the data default and see what your UI does.
Yeah, you can see what kind of values you're getting.
Yeah, so at the very least, this is a very good way to get into like where the value is. Once you get into complex applications and you are including like state management through Vuex for store, then you have tools for working with Vuex, and you can see what changes happen as your store is being updated and mutations are being applied. And you can even you can do, I think it's called like time traveling, where you can, you can see your changes and then you can undo your changes, so you can helps with debugging and stuff. Events also shows events that were fired, but I don't have any events. So it is great if you're working with Vue.
Is your button Vue component? Find out more.
I think it's just a router link.
Cool.
Yeah, just goes to the about page.
Yeah, the event thing is really nice too, because you'll see they'll see clicks or whatever image you're capturing.
Yeah. It is a must-have for Vue development. Any other questions? Any general questions or error questions?
There's a question about how did you delete an entire line in VS Code?
Oh,
I've never seen that before.
I mean, when you're working with Vue, like this is just the power that Vue gives you. Now, let's see. So, yeah, if I have a line that I want to delete, I can press Control X, delete it.
I have the Sublime text key cut that shows like Command Shift K.
Yeah.
It depends,
Yeah. Keyboard shortcuts are pretty sweet. Got a long way to learn though for me. Not nearly as like.
Isn't that normally cut?
Yeah. So if you have like a section highlighted and you Command X, it'll cut it. But if you don't have anything highlighted, you will cut the entire line. Cool. Well, that's it.
Are there a few plugins that you like for Visual Studio?
Yeah, probably the most common or popular one is going to be Vue. It's also something that you kind of, if you're going to be working with Vue, it's kind of a must-have, because without it, the .vue files, which is like the most common way to work in Vue, they will not have all of the syntax highlighting. Like all of the syntax highlighting is provided by Vue, as well as things like I don't know, some other stuff to do with like auto formatting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you auto format your HTML in the Vue file?
Yeah. So if I write that poorly and hit save, it auto formats it.
Oh, okay.
Or sometimes if like my line length gets too long, like I don't know, title equals too long. That should have. Oh, you know what? We don't have the proper formatting styles or the formatting rules for how this project should work, but we will.
I do a lot of folding my projects, and sometimes I have errors and I have to go up and fold a bunch of stuff.
You mean like ready to do this guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just helps to keep things out of the way when you're trying to work on a specific area, or just like have that area kind of focused on. You can have that and just kind of say, okay, what is this doing? While the console logging in and just checking back and forth. That would be helpful.
For
But
sure.
it can also be annoying, so like, I don't know what.
Cool. Well, I think that's it. I'm gonna close this guy down.